Well, now I feel like I have to say, changing gears. Michelle and I are at different ends of this journey or different parts of the spectrum, and which I actually think is a great way of doing this. I'm going to talk about my journey a little bit, and I'm going to begin with a quote. John Steinbeck said, "The profession of book writing makes horse racing seem like a solid, stable business." And I'm here to tell you that John was right. You know, people tend to think that, avid readers as well as aspiring writers tend to believe that, they want to write a book, that first book, once you write it, if you get it published, that somehow that's it. You've reached that pinnacle, everything will be good from ever after. And unfortunately, that is not correct. In most cases, that's not at all what happens. Every once in a while, there is a writer who comes on the scene and you've never heard of them before, and all of a sudden their book is huge, it's everywhere, it's achieved everything. Dorothea Benton-Frank was talking, I know, this morning about her first book, hitting the New York Times list in the number 9 slot, and that all of her books since have been that way. And it's really an exciting thing to see happen. However, that has not been my experience, and for many writers, it's not like that at all. In fact, what happens is it can be a very slow build, book after book, subject after subject, and that is a more usual progression, I would say. I actually came to fiction after 20 years in broadcasting. You heard about my checkered career. I had been a journalism major. After college, I worked at a PBS affiliate for many years, both in front of and behind the camera. I wrote scripts, I wrote corporate projects, I did voiceovers for companies and for commercials and for corporations. I did a lot of different things. I worked on several feature films. During that time, I'll admit, my claim to fame was being the host of Desperate and Dateless, and it was very appropriate because I was both of those things at the time. But I did get married a little bit later than some. My mother was in despair, and we had children even later than that. And I was really fortunate in that I did get to stay home with our 2 sons. It was a choice that I made. I was fortunate to get to do it. But, I had always worked, and I know I can't actually see anybody, but I'm sure there are a lot of women in this room, and that you can relate to the fact that as wonderful a calling as motherhood is, after a certain number of dirty diapers, your brain gets kind of mushy. And that's exactly what happened to me. I loved being there. I was exhausted all the time. And I could tell that I needed something for myself, something to apply my brain to. And so I actually, I'd always written. I'd been a journalism major. Like most writers, I'm a voracious reader. If my family would leave me alone, I could read a book a day, no problem. But I had never actually tried to write fiction. So at this point in time, I had a 2-year-old and a newborn when I decided that I would write a book. Yeah, I know. I don't know what I was thinking. I do chalk that up now to post-pregnancy hormones and lack of sleep, because I had no understanding of what it was I was trying to do and what it would take to do that. And it probably is a good thing that I didn't know. So because of the age of my kids, it took me years to write that first book. And I wrote a story about a woman who had been a producer at a PBS affiliate for many years. And when she leaves there, she hosts a show called Desperate and Dateless. Yeah, like a lot of first-time authors, unlike Michelle, clearly, what I wrote was almost completely autobiographical, except for all the really great sex that I wrote. I know, I made all of that up. So anyway, I didn't realize at the time, I actually was incredibly fortunate to sell the first book that I wrote. That does not always happen. I meet writers all the time, with many, many rejected manuscripts, that are under the bed. That didn't happen to me. But in fact, an odd thing happened because of that. I realized that I didn't actually know what I was doing. As it turns out, I'm a fairly instinctual writer. I think a lot of the elements of story just sort of happened naturally. But when you want to actually build a career and write more than one book, it would be really helpful, to know how to actually do that. So yeah, like a lot of people before me, I started reading everything I could get my hands on about craft, about plotting, which is still my weakest problem, character development. I was really looking for a set of steps to follow. You know, I thought there must be rules that would tell me how to do this. You know, I'm a perfectionist. My children refer to this as anal retentive, but I just think of it as being a perfectionist. And I wanted a clear set of instructions. Somerset Maugham said, there are 3 rules for writing. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. And then there's E.L. Doctorow, who famously said, writing a novel is like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. This was not what I wanted to hear. So I basically had to soldier on. For me, I have to tell you, even after actually 9 novels, I have a book coming out this April. I find that the beginning of each book is a leap of faith. It is a facing down of the blank computer screen until I understand my characters and their growth arcs and the journeys that I want to take them on. As you will hear today or have heard in some of the sessions already, every writer has a way that they approach both their work and their career. They are all different. Even though I keep trying to find out the right way to do this, there isn't one. So that's just the way it is. But I have learned a lot of things along the way that I'll try to share some of with you. The first thing that I discovered when I really began writing in a more serious way was what is referred to as your voice. You hear that word all the time. I think that is that one thing that sets writers apart from each other. You have a favorite author, undoubtedly you can pick up one of their books and in the first paragraph you would know who that writer was, even if you didn't have the jacket with you. I did not set out intentionally to write a funny book. I didn't realize that I was funny. And I actually started writing, and in fact, it turned out that that was the way it came out. That was my voice. And so my earlier books, and I noticed in the bookstore, actually it was quite cool that they have my entire collection, starting with the earlier romantic comedies and building into my more recent books. So I began writing what is called a romantic comedy, and I sold to Random House at that time. My first book was one called 7 Days and 7 Nights, and it was very much a battle of the sexes kind of story. It was set in a talk radio station. The heroine was a sort of kinder, gentler Dr. Laura, and he did a late-night irreverent show called Guy Talk, and they were on the same station. They were taking pot shots at each other, and this was right when Survivor was first becoming really popular. So I thought, oh, that would be a lot of fun. So what I did was I had the publicity department decide that they would lock them both in an apartment for a week as a part of a publicity stunt with a webcam rolling, and right before they go in, they tell them that only one of their shows will survive, and they have a past that nobody knows about. So that was my first book for Bantam that came out. And after that came a book called Leave It to Cleavage. I'm waiting for you to get it, okay. That is my favorite title ever. It's a story about a jilted housewife and former Miss Rhododendron who must save the family bra business and the town it supports. Yeah, I know it takes a while sometimes, but that actually is what is called in the book world and in the movie business a high concept idea. Not highbrow necessarily, but when you can reduce a book into one sentence, that's usually a good thing because it allows marketing and sales and the reader actually to know what the story is about. There was a lot of humor, obviously, in that story, but there was a lot more than that, too. The heroine of that story is a longtime beauty pageant contestant. She's now a beauty pageant consultant. There is a lingerie business in her family that's been passed down from woman to woman, but she doesn't run it because no one thinks she could ever do that, including herself. The book actually begins, she's looking for a stamp, and what she finds instead is pictures of her ex-linebacker husband dressed in all the lingerie that her family's company manufactures. And then she discovers that he has run off and absconded with the company's money. So it was very much really a story of self-discovery. It was a story about a woman finding out who she is, what she's made of. And just to show you how much I know about marketing, the whole time I wrote that book, and the title that I argued for quite a while was The Making of Miranda, because to me, that was exactly what that story was. Leave It to Cleavage sold a lot more books, but okay. At any rate, it was a woman's journey of self-discovery, which is something I've been drawn to writing over and over again. After that came Hostile Makeover, which is a story about two sisters, one who's done everything she was supposed to do and is questioning her life, and one who's done nothing she was supposed to do and is questioning her life. After that came Single in Suburbia, which is a story about a suburban baseball mom, which is what I've been forever, who is traded in for a younger model. And so she ends up at the Little League field where she's always been so comfortable, having to see her ex-husband, with Tiffany and all of that. And she actually meets and bonds with two other women who don't quite fit in there. One of them is multiply divorced and is dating the divorced Little League coach, and the other is a trophy wife who is now discovering how much harder it is to be a wife than it is to be a girlfriend. So, this is the thing. I think that it's really easy to be strong when things are good and everything's going well. We obviously find out how strong we really are when things fall down around us, and that is what I write. That's what I do to my characters. I put them in situations where they're forced to discover who they are and what they're made of. I do deal with serious subjects. I deal with death, divorce, bankruptcy, illness, infidelity, but I seem to belong to the Julie Andrews Sound of Music School of Writing, and that I believe a spoonful of humor makes the harsh realities go down. With each book I've written, the number of protagonists has grown, the number of points of view that I write have grown, their interwoven journeys of self-discovery have become more and more complex. I write about the kind of friendships that get us through those really tough times. And I think, too, that, it is at this point referred to often as women's fiction, largely because the majority of my protagonists are women. I do have male readers, and I do hear from them. In fact, I seem to be quite popular with the prison population. I know. I think they like the title Leave It to Cleavage as much as I did. So anyway, I seem to be in prisons everywhere. At any rate, at that point, I just to go back to the progress of my career, things seemed to be going really well. I felt I was finding a readership. My kids were getting older, so I was managing to write about a book a year, which was getting me out regularly, and things were feeling really good. At that point, however, my editor left the publishing house where I was, and in publishing, your editor is actually your champion within the publishing house. That's the person who buys your work in the first place, and then they are really your conduit. They interface on your behalf with everybody, with sales, with marketing, publicity, the art department. Really, almost anything that happens for you at a publishing house is funneled through your editor. It's not unusual for an editor to leave one house and go to another, or leave the business, or, it happens all the time. I always joke in New York, the reason they have those revolving doors, is so they can get out of there faster. But, it's just a fact of life in publishing. What happens when you lose an editor is, they will assign someone else to you. And sometimes that works out okay. I know there are people who've had wonderful careers with, multiple editors, no big deal. But sometimes it's not good. And that's exactly what happened to me. The person who took over my work, we had no chemistry. Not an ounce. And I don't think she understood what I was doing or why. In fact, if we have time later, I'll tell you some weird story. One thing she made me do that was just outrageous. But anyway, okay, you want to hear this? We're going to do some editor bashing here. So I'll just tell you, in Leave It to Cleavage, in Single in Suburbia, this woman is worried about losing her house, and keeping things for her kids and all of that. And so she ends up having to clean her neighbors' houses, and because she has no way of making money, and her husband is not behaving well. And so she's embarrassed by having to do this, and so she decides to wear a disguise, and so nobody will know that it's her. So originally, because I live in the Atlanta area, and it was not a comment on anything, I made the maid Hispanic, because that just happens to be what is typical where I live. And I turned the book in, and this new editor, who I can't stand, she says to me, she says, oh, well, we can't possibly print that because that's politically incorrect and we will offend people, and no. And so then she came up with the really brilliant idea that this maid should be a French maid because there are so many of them in East Cobb where I live. It was ridiculous. But honestly, at that point, what I did, I actually did it. I made fun of it all the way through. I had to go in and create a backstory for that character where she had studied in Paris and she had a great love that she kind of walked away from, and she was a drama major, so she could do that. And anyway, it was outrageously silly. In the end, it kind of worked for the book, so if you read it, you'll tell me what you think. But it was just one of those things. She just didn't have a clue what I was doing. And so it was not a good relationship. And at that point, I made a decision, not necessarily a good decision, but I owed them one last book in my contract, and I made the choice to actually buy that book back. I gave them money back, which, by the way, if anyone is an aspiring writer, I would not recommend ever doing this. I will never give money back again. It was, whatever. I thought I was being proactive and it would make sense to do that. And I was quite unhappy because my work had really evolved. It became much deeper, I think, and broader. And I was still being marketed with little cartoon covers and shelved in romance, although all my books have relationships, and that is an important part of the story. That is not the story. So I felt I was missing the readers I was actually writing for. So bottom line, I had to find a new agent to get me out of there. It took a long time. It was not the best move I've ever made. And unfortunately, during that time, I had almost a 3-year gap between my last book for them and the first book that came out after that. And in a writing career, that can be a problem, to just disappear for that long. But at any rate, that's what happened. There is a writer, lesser known than the others I've mentioned. Her name is Tapani Baghi, and she said, everything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and later you can use it in some story. So that's exactly what I did. I wrote a book at that point in time. It was all about my disappointment in the publishing industry and how difficult and brutal it can be. It's called The Accidental Bestseller. It's a story about 4 writers who are critique partners and have been friends since before any of them got published, who basically help each other survive the publishing industry. They're in very different places in their careers. One of them has been a New York Times bestseller from the get-go. Another one of them writes inspirational romances, has a husband who's a famous televangelist, and she has a secret that could bring them both down. Another is more like, based on my life, in that she, was writing women's fiction, everything was kind of falling apart and so on. And the other writes category romance novels, is a single mother, has 2 children, an alcoholic mother, 2 jobs, and so on. So they're very different people, but I will tell you this, it's not unusual to see writers who become very close because of the writing they have in common, not necessarily their everyday lives. But at any rate, they are the characters in this story, and when this one writer's career and personal life begin to fall apart, she has to deliver a book. Does this sound familiar to you? But she could not afford to buy her novel back, and she has to deliver it. And so she can't do it. So her writer friends, it's a book within a book, story about 4 writers and so on. And so the other 3 friends volunteer actually to help her write it. They're each going to write one of these characters because they think no one will ever know it was them, and so they write the truth about themselves. And also, in the real world, a book like that, end of a contract, not a good situation, they would have slapped a cover on it and they would have just stuck it on some shelves. It would have been all done. But I wrote this book, and so it becomes a runaway bestseller and hits all the lists. And in the end, all of these characters are exposed for having done this, and it impacts their careers, their lives, their friendship. But it's very much a group story like that. I've joked the names have been changed to protect the innocent, but there are a lot of people in New York that I hope recognize themselves. Yeah, it was a very satisfying book to write, and it is. Well, I'm just saying, sometimes you kill people because you can. This was just like that. But I would just say this. It was really, I love this book, and I think that it is true a look at what it is to be a working writer today, as I could write without having to label it nonfiction. So if you're interested in seeing what the industry can be like, you might want to check that out. After that came a book called Magnolia Wednesdays, which is about a group of women who meet and bond through a ballroom dance studio that one of them owns. And there are two estranged sisters at the heart of that story. After that came 10 Beach Road, which Elaine mentioned briefly. It's about three strangers who lose everything in a Bernie Madoff-style Ponzi scheme. And when they wake up, you know, they realize they have absolutely nothing except for co-ownership in what turns out to be this dilapidated beachfront mansion. None of them actually lost it on their own. One of them is a suburban woman who's now an empty nester, thinks her whole life is ready to begin when she finds out that her husband actually lost not only everything that they had, but has been getting dressed for 6 months and pretending to go to work when he no longer has a job. So once he confesses this to her, he basically is glued to the couch. That's it for him, and she has to step up. Another character is an architect who's on HGTV, who's unfortunately been turned into the Vanna White of the do-it-yourself set, which is appalling to her. And everything her father just left her when he died has been lost. And there is Nikki, who is a dating guru, matchmaker to the A-list, who has lost everything, and it is actually her brother who turns out to have been the person who perpetrated this Ponzi scheme. So, you know, they end up forced to be together. They spent a long sweat-soaked summer trying to bring this really cool 1920s Mediterranean revival mansion back to life. During the writing and researching of that, I did become totally addicted to home and garden television. I had to watch it. It was necessary. And it is a little odd because, honestly, I'm glad my husband isn't here this time, because I can tell you that in our family, we are not allowed to own tools because we require medical attention afterward. I did a little video about that. But anyway, I mean, it was just really, I learned a huge amount because I was a journalism major. To me, getting things right is important. I have seen other authors, you know, be able to write off at the end and say, well, it's fiction, I made it all up. But, you know, we do strive, some of us, to be as real as we can. Ocean Beach followed 10 Beach Road. It was the first time that I had ever written a sequel, and I was interested to hear Lisa C. last night talk about the challenges of doing that when you didn't intend to in the first place. And it is hard. I will never close anything up completely again, just in case. It is a story about those same characters who head down to South Beach to shoot what they think is going to be their new renovation program called Do-Over. But when they get to this Art Deco streamline on South Beach that they're supposed to work on, they find out that the network has actually changed the focus of the program, and now it is a reality TV show, and all the cameras are aimed at them. The home belongs to this really cool vaudevillian and former comedian. He and his wife were the George Burns, Gracie Allen of Miami Beach, and he has a tragic past, you know, and a secret agenda. So that's that story. And actually, that almost brings us up to date. In April, I have a new book coming out called While We Were Watching Downton Abbey. How many of you are Downton fans? I'm just curious. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, well, I have been told that I have the distinction of writing the very first contemporary novel about the fans of Downton Abbey and of a television series. So I'm a total addict at this point. It's driving me crazy. And in it, 3 women and a British concierge of an Atlanta historic apartment building are brought together by the television series. And yeah, I'm already in total withdrawal waiting for season 4. So I'm thinking about writing a book in the meantime called While We Were Waiting for Downton Abbey to Come Back On, okay? That might be my next move. You know, I've complained at times that because I write humor, nobody takes me seriously. And sometimes, you know, it is kind of offensive that, you know, it's not that easy to write funny. I'm just going to tell you that. But I also hear from a lot of readers who really just want to escape and go somewhere with characters that they can relate to and identify with. And that is what I'm striving to bring to each book. I hope if you haven't had a chance to read me yet that you will pick up a book today and then let me know what you think, okay? Thank you.
Here we go.
Can maybe y'all talk about your writing process a little bit, whether you write in order, whether you write in the morning, at night,
Okay, well, because I started when my children were so young, what I actually learned to do was to sit down, frankly, as soon as I dropped them at school or they got on the bus, and write until, I mean, I can't tell you, sometimes I'm embarrassed to say, when I would hear that school bus coming, I was like, oh no, I have to stop. But I learned to just write when I could. And I don't know, when you're a mother, what happens is they come home and then you have after school activities and dinner and homework and all those kinds of things. So I had a specific chunk of time that was mine, and I learned I had to take advantage of it. I mean, now actually my youngest has gone to college and, our life is very different, but I'm still in that habit. So I typically find the mornings really my freshest, most creative. I mean, I can later in the day, by later in the day, I mean, I can do like the business of writing, but I'm pretty much done, unless I'm on deadline, in which case I could do it, but.
And I'm still in that world where as soon as my children are 14, 10, and 7. So forget it. After school time, yeah, I'm in shot. So really, I write early in the morning. As soon as they leave the house, that's when I try to get my writing done. But when I wrote The Iguana Tree, my younger two were not even in, well, my youngest was a baby, and my middle one was just in preschool. So I had one day, it was Thursdays, and that was a designated holy writing day. And I had a writing sitter, I called her my writing sitter, who would come, I would eat a good breakfast and get a big thing of coffee, and then I would leave the house and I would go to the local college library, and I would sit there for 7 hours and not get out of my chair and just write. And sometimes that was the only day of the week that I could get it done, but Thursdays were designated writing days. Now that they're all in school, my youngest is in first grade, and I am not working all I do now is write. I mean, that's my full job. So I'm able to do that when they're in school, which is nice. I mean, you watch the clock and it gets closer to 2:30 and you think, yeah.
Well, there's nothing like being in the middle of a crucial scene, or really somewhere important, and you have to stop. I have always envied, not to be sexist, but I have often envied male writers who typically are not having to do as many other things as, are not necessarily the primary parent and that sort of thing.
Okay, guys, one more question. There we go.
I was curious, have you gotten any feedback from Mexican Americans about your story?
Yes, and that's been some of the most surprising and meaningful development with this. As Elaine mentioned, the book has been chosen by Clemson for their freshman read. So this summer, all the incoming freshmen at Clemson are required to read it. And that's actually the 5th college that's chosen it for a freshman read. Wow. It's the largest, and it's my alma mater. So that was really exciting for me. But 4 others have chosen it, one of which was Catawba Valley Community College in Hickory, North Carolina, which I think their student body is about 5,000. And they read it this past fall. So in the fall, I was over in Hickory to speak to that student body, and I was surprised at the number of Hispanic students. And so I was in their gymnasium speaking sort of like this to all the students. And afterwards, one of the faculty members who I'd already met said, Michelle, come here, the student really wants to meet you. And it was this young Mexican student, this gal, who was with her mother. And, this is my first book, so I'm really a nobody, but they made me feel like they were meeting Oprah Winfrey or something. And the mother was like, so excited, and they hugged me, and they explained, the mother said that when the daughter had been reading the book, that she would read it every night aloud to the mother in the kitchen as she was fixing the family dinner, because they had crossed illegally when this girl was a little girl. And they told me, and they somehow were legal now, they were documented, but their story was that this girl and her siblings and cousins were crossing with the mother and aunt. So it was all children and 2 females, and they made the naive mistake of paying these 2 coyotes half the money before they started their journey. And they got into the desert, and they were getting dehydrated, they were lost, And the coyotes said, "We know where some water is, so we're going to leave you here and go get some. We can move more quickly if you're not with us, and we'll be back in a few hours."
Wow.
Did not come back. And they left this girl and her siblings and her cousins and her mother and her aunt in the desert. And the girl says she remembers being dehydrated, sick from dehydration. And they finally came to something which, the way she described it, was almost like a cistern or some sort of something that cattle drink water from. And she remembers her mother taking off her shirt, soaking it in this nasty water, and wringing it out above the girl's mouth so she could drink water. And so, to answer your question, yeah, it was hard for me not to cry when these people were telling me their story, very emotional for them. So yeah, it's been wonderful, the response that I've had from the Latino community who's read the book. Thank you.
Excellent. Did you want to ask your question too? I saw one hand right down here. Right.
I wanted to ask you when you got the title, The Iguana Tree, and what it actually means.
Okay, she asked, where did I get the title, The Iguana Tree, and what does it actually mean? Well, I'll tell you, Cormac McCarthy is my favorite author. And when my book was about to be, my working title for this book for 4 years was The Crossing. And that's sort of like when you name your child, that's it. This book is going to be The Crossing. And when it was about to come out, my publishers and Cormac McCarthy won the Pulitzer for The Road, the year that this was getting published. My publisher said, Cormac wrote a book called The Crossing. And I said, oh, I didn't. That one got away from me. I didn't know that. So I said, we can't. Legally I could do that, but I didn't want to do that. So I changed it to The Iguana Tree, and I'm very happy with that because in the courtyard outside of Lilia's home in Mexico is a tree where an iguana often suns on the limb. And Lilia sits out in that courtyard. She literally goes to the courtyard and sits there sort of to meditate and mull what's going on in her life, pray sometimes. And she speaks to this iguana. Later in the book, when she is no longer in her village and she can't literally go to that tree, she figuratively goes to that tree in her head because that was sort of her safe place, her special place. And when bad things are happening to her in her mind, she goes to the iguana tree. So that's where I got the title.
Good.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.